It is a great pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot to Bettina, to, of course, Maya, and also Tim for organizing this and having me as a speaker. I'm quite excited. Also because the invitation was to speak about my latest book, which is entitled The Digital Continent on Nature and Poetics. And what I realized preparing the presentation is that it's not easy to talk about this book, what this book does actually. So that's a bit how the title came about. What I want to do is to kind of work out the context, so a bit where these interests are coming from. The book reads in part, I guess, or I could imagine, a bit cryptic. That's not because I want to be cryptic. It's for other reasons that I have taken the challenge to think about how to basically mediate. It's something I usually don't like to do. I don't think things should be mediated as much as they are today. Everywhere, everything is mediated. I think I kind of believe in the fullness of experience, of exposing oneself as well. But then, of course, mediation is important and actually fun. So this is a bit how the title came about. Last things that remain. It's a circumscription of the Greek term eschaton, which is in eschatology. And eschatology has something to do with time, with futurity, and with hope. So it's a term that we know mainly, from religious contexts today. But there is, of course, a much older history, and there is also, I think, a very kind of an actuality of our times to attend to these issues. Because, like I wrote in the abstract announcing the talk today, there is not really any talk of apocalypsism, of an end times, of the last generation, of the saving of species, and so on. Many of the topics that are almost journalistic today, they actually involve and evoke such a place. So this was a bit my ambition here. It's not going to be a theology paper, don't worry. But it's also not so evident, maybe at first hand, of how to speak about these things to specifically an architecture audience, because it's not a book that would somehow show you how to apply some theory into your entwerfen or into your projects. It's also not an understanding of theory that would somehow make an argument that sits in a particular position in a certain discursive field where it would clearly contrast to other proposals that have been made. It's not about that. My interest in the digital has always been not so much in terms of epistemology and the objectivity of it, but in terms of what do we learn with the digital that we haven't been able to do before, and how to attend to this. So it's a strong emphasis on a notion of, in German, there is a beautiful word for it, das Können. No, so impredicative, just das Können, not to be skilled in doing something specific, but to have enlarged the scope of what becomes, in a way, a daily facet, let's say, of our routines. And clearly these have expanded in great ways with the digital and the computer. But at the same time, we don't much attend to it in this right. So for me, that's always the question behind. So I think in this note as well, I would like to start with quite a short excerpt, maybe on the background image first. What you see here, this is Ariadne. It's Ariadne being left behind after having successfully saved Theseus from being eaten by the Minotaur in the labyrinth, crafted by Daedalus. And Daedalus, this will be the motivic key through my talk. Daedalus is, of course, this ingenious inventor. Some say architect, others say engineer. I'm not sure if it matters that much. But he built the labyrinth. It's one of the things that he built in a kind of a reasoning that I think we can best call a cunning reasoning. So it was a reasoning which clearly had to work. So there was truth involved. There was also something mechanical, something machinic involved, but none of it was necessary in the way that it comes about. And in that sense, Daedalic objects, or the term an adjective, basically, also a noun that comes from the proper name of Daedalos, is called Daedalic. So they are objects, or now in my case, vernaculars or tongues, so spoken languages that embody that kind of quality of Daedalus. So they're inventive, they're cunning, there is a sort of trickstery involved, there is a sense of urgency involved, there is a sense of just making it once more for a little while longer. No, it's exactly not about at the end of the day, in the last instance, what this will all come down to. So it's exactly not all these things that we usually associate with the eschaton, which is this other topic that I want to talk about. So then, the short excerpt that I would like to read in the beginning is from a title that is actually newer than this book. This is the book. I brought a copy for your institute, of course. And it's entitled, Anything is a Diamond, the Computational Jeweler and its Cosmos. I want to read only a very short passage from it. It's a text that engages with AI, with materials, with fabrication, but also with the kind of intellection, with the kind of thinking that is involved in that. And its assumption is to say, the art of the jeweler. So the jewels are, of course, standing for eternity. They are also stones. So they come from the belly of the earth. They are super speculative in the treatments that they receive, and they are crafted into jewelry. So it's not at all evident what they stand for or what they are useful for. But at the same time, they have to be handled. They have to be handled in a particular way. So the title and this interest in Lapidary's work comes from a book that Michel Serres published. He was a French philosopher. I have worked a lot on him in the last years, not because I want to be a scholar that concentrates on one particular philosopher, but because he is one of the very rare voices today which actually address the digital and computation and AI and all of these things in a manner that very self-consciously starts from the primacy of coding. Code is not science. Code is not number. Code is not geometry. Code is not form. Code is also not symbol, like in algebra. And yet it's all of these. So the coding paradigm is really a big thing to, I think, still start thinking about. It's very often left transparent because that's also how code works. No? So if we have a code for something, then that we have a code for it disappears behind an appearance of evidence, or it seems natural. Things seem natural when we know the code. No, but then this is a notion of knowing, which I think we no longer, which is intuitive, which is embodied, and in which we are challenged by machine learning and by AI. So we can no longer be so comfortable in attending to so many things like that, no? To know it implicitly. So there's a kind of a knowing that is different, and this is what this picture of the artisanry. The artisanry evokes. So the short passage goes like this. The earth, I'm reading here on activity and artifice. The earth sends out messages like the sky does. So Michel Serres' proposal of a materialist poetics of cosmic time suggests somewhat surprisingly. In the belly of the planet lie stars. Can they be read like the firmament? Wouldn't this mean bringing together matter and form, mass and light, hard and soft? It is the most ordinary thing, you will perhaps say. Everything that exists does this, subject as it is to time and living in space. And yet, when we think of our activities, our techniques, how we spend our days, we keep hard and soft apart and seldom mix them. Masons, farmers, blacksmiths, working with the heart, furrows, steel, concrete, or with the soft, office or bank, workers, lawyers, teachers, files, reports or accounts, figures and codes. In fact, as Michel Serres tells the story, this separation dates back to the dawn of time. For farmers and alchemists alike, the earth remains hard and fire emanates enough power to cook our food, drive our aircraft engines, or even detonate bombs. On the other hand, water and a gentle breeze caress the skin of our beauties and the hair of our beloved. The ancient Greeks called this wind anemos, from which we French have derived l'âme, the soul, and the ancient Latins called it spiritus, from which we have formed, let's play, the mind. So the story is about that's the interesting proposal. It's to say, rather than trying to resolve the hard against the soft or the soft against the hard, which one takes over and kind of creates a certain historical epoch, what the jeweler is concerned with is the art of making the hard soft and the soft hard. Yeah? So this kind of chiastic crossing, and this is why I chose it as a motto for this interest. It's a tempering, if you want, it's genuinely playing on the level of coding. So it's never trying to get to the epistemological or ontological status of truth or of its positive value or of its belonging in a larger order. It's about tempering. There's something eminently climatic about the way that we could also engage with the digital. And this is at the core of what I tried to do in my book. So my book has taken the title of actually just one of its articles. The book doesn't make one argument that is written like a monograph, so trying to tell a larger story. It's more a collection of writings that came about in different occasions, but they all somehow revolve around this issue with the code, how to address this domain of code, this coding activity, which is as immaterial as it is material, how to think of this in the registers that contemporary discourses propose, new materialist discourses, of course. But if you're familiar with that, you know that there is not such a thing as the new materialist doctrine. It is super diverse. You really have a lot of different proposals that are much more interesting if we think about how they resonate together than which one we want to associate with, at least in my background. So the digital continent takes the title from one of these essays where it was about coding as quantum literacy. And its core idea in the beginning was very straightforward and simple. It was to say, well, if the digital kind of becomes our storage space for what we call knowledge or skills or forms of conduct or cultural techniques, no? So if the digital, whatever it may be, becomes this kind of repository for all these things, then couldn't we see in it a kind of a ground, a kind of a reason literally meets ground, a ground that wouldn't be territorial, that wouldn't be politically distributed first, no, before one can start to belong or to kind of define where one stands. Couldn't we think of it as a kind of an immaterial ground, a continent, and one which, the more of it, it's a bit like with these things, no, that we speak about when we say we can't share something like language, knowledge, or love. No, when we share them, it grows. It doesn't get less. It kind of follows a different dynamics. And the point was, well, if the digital could be fantasized or fabulated in such a way to give us a ground, a kind of a continentality, and I will come to why continent, of course, in a moment. I know it sounds at first instance not very correct geopolitically, but my argument is more a geographical than a political one. So then this continent would be a place where two things happened. Nobody, with regards to the knowledge it contains, could claim to be native. No? Nobody speaks code just by mother tongue. Everybody needs to acquire it as they get educated, as they become adults, as they grow up. Nobody is native in mathematics. And yet everybody anyway becomes literate in it to a certain extent. No? So it was a kind of an idea like this that gave inspiration to it. But what really kind of brought me to make it the title of the book is that I do think it's interesting to think about the kind of the categorical status, not the ontological status, but how do we relate to knowledge? How do we relate to information in the sense of content? No, so it's not empty. It does something. It behaves. It gives us something. It unlocks. It also closes things. So, what are our fabulations with regards to knowledge? It used to be an encyclopedia. Then it used to be a kind of a pyramid of disciplines where one would provide the foundation and then the others would kind of deductively follow out of it and make it richer and make the big house that contains all knowledge more and more generous. This was very much the Enlightenment idea. The Romantics began to flirt again with the encyclopedia, but mainly they would want to think of it as a labyrinth. They would say, it's not this encyclopedia, which is called encyclopedia because it's the form of a circle. So there is nothing that will not fit in the encyclopedia. No? This is the beautiful gesture of placing all that can be known within the bounds of a circle, which are, of course, infinite. Also, yeah, its extent would be infinite, no? If we wanted to unfold it. So the encyclopedia will never have to exclude something, but it will also never give us one particular order that corresponds to it. So there is a whole tradition of encyclopedia writing, and they are basically world models. They are really like a bit perhaps like today's obsession with ontologies, except that our ontologies today, they want to claim that they're absolute. The encyclopedias, they were totally fine with thinking, yes, we are fabulated. No, and you have it's always about the world. It's a bit like when you go to school as a child, you have Naturkunde, you have all these kind of very basic, unpretentious, semantically fuzzy, but also generous kind of labels in the encyclopedias. So the Romantics in the 19th century, they would very much sympathize with it, but they were looking for a synthesis of all of the encyclopedias. And this became to be then the labyrinth. Nietzsche has written on the labyrinth. I will come to this in a moment. And with the labyrinth, especially this figure that we see here sitting on the shores and left behind by Theseus, Ariadne. So what you can keep in mind as a motto is a bit, how can Ariadne, so two things, no? The encyclo, so we don't, I don't find it attractive to think in terms of the house, of the Enlightenment house, no, with a clear foundation and then all the departments and then the clear structure of a house that would accommodate everything that can be known. I don't think that's a good story today for many reasons. The encyclopedia directly also is not, because it cannot contract, no. So it cannot. It's a bit monadic. An encyclopedia. It's a bit like Leibniz's monads. So it needs a notion of contracting between these encyclopedias if there is no authoritative reference. So then, how to think of it, while taking this very serious that there is this everything that can be known has a beyond and below, let's say. No, what can be known is usually meeting the line of what can be rationalized, what can be reasoned mathematically. But things that become to be reasoned mathematically at one point have not been false before. No, so there is a kind of a beyond which is not an absolute beyond. No, so it's a zone that in antiquity people have called the meteora. So the meteora, they are not properly part of the fabrics of the heavens where the god lives. And they are also not properly chthonic, no? Where things are elemental and cyclical and determinate. They're in between. They are where the wind blows. They are where water can become dew, but it can also become steam, where colors appear in rainbows, but also absorb temperature and so on. So where all of these material kind of conversions happen, transformations happen. And the way to study this domain, this is by such an understanding of mathematics. No? So mathematics always gives us the ultimate points. So basically the limit in relation to which one could speak of the last, no? Or at the edge or something like that. And yet it keeps growing, no? In a qualitative sense. So it gets more and more powerful. It's not that what was invented earliest loses its validity. Everything that people would describe in this way 2,000 years ago is still totally true and valid today. But it has shifted its scope, let's say, of giving good explanations, of handling itself for fabulating a world in a meteora sense. So so then the maze, the knowledge, the data, no, the flood, people speak, it's very biblical if you pay attention to the wordings that are around in these topics. But one evident figure is actually the maze and Ariadne. And what Nietzsche, this here is a citation by Nietzsche from the 19th century, but he was so fond of about Ariadne is that she shows us a world where philosophy would never appear unmasked. So truth would not be false only because it appears with a mask, so because it is dramatized. So then the question is, how can Ariadne is the person who can show us a way, no, out of a maze. So the assumption is in a maze, it's dangerous. It's not just that we don't know where we are. Something is contained in the maze, which is a threat to us. And we find ourselves in this maze because somebody else was threatened by us, so we need to find a way out. This is the story of Theseus and Ariadne and Minos, King Minos. And what Ariadne does is she gives a trick. She gives Theseus, as he is sent into the labyrinth, the piece of wool, so that wherever he goes, he can leave a thread. So he can leave a thread, and then he can roll it up and finds its way out. And this is a very strong image for a notion of method. Method literally means it points a way. And the difficulty is, how can we think of method in a way that does not predetermine the point that it will lead us to? No? So this was the quest of a universal method. From the point of view of how it operates, not from the point of view of what it legitimates. A lot of people interested in the universal method, they are interested in a method that would legitimate things in an unbiased way. That's not the way that I relate to it, but in the way a method which can be followed, which we can trust to a certain extent, whatever our field of inquiry is. And this is where Ariadne is important. And Nietzsche put it quite straightforward when he said, whoever likes or makes his friends, let's say, with the idea that knowledge is organized rather like a labyrinth today, as a scientist, as a philosopher, basically is in search of his or her Ariadne. But Ariadne has another story, and this is, I didn't realize this for a long time. What you see here is, what's his name? Bacchus, the name which is much more famous. Dionysus, of course. She was also married to Dionysus. Ariadne was the wife of Dionysus. And this is quite striking. And what we see here is, it's called in the literature, it's a particular vase that is quite old. It's called Dionysus Epiphany. And what is striking about this picture is that if we take the allegorical meaning of Ariadne and Dionysos joining forces, no? So living in a marriage, sending an oikos. Ricardo, can I hand over? Not sure why she's so nervous. Yeah. No, so then there would be no the idea of having Dionysos setting sail, going on adventure, going on a heroic trip, trying to sail new seas, to go where people have not been before, or anything like that. It's just not likely for Dionysos to engage with, and especially not if one allegorizes symbolically what such a marriage could stand for. And yet, here it is. What I find interesting now, and this is coming back to, I've spoken about the continent, but the sea, no? So this sea that one is traveling. I would like to think of it as the waters, as the seas that kind of divides this mathematical line, no? of a meteora quasi beyond and a meteora quasi below. No? So this is in a way the shore. This is the place. So one needs Ariadne on one side, but that doesn't mean one knows where one heads for. So this kind of navigation. And there is one sense of the digital that is quite straightforward technically, is simply to say the digital is a logarithm. Oh, it's the base 2 of relations. It's a logarithm. And logarithms, they lend themselves for map making. So now what would be this kind of Dionysian way of engaging with a rationality like that? It would be to extrapolate a complementary term to what the logarithm does. The logarithm shortens the path. Logarithms help us to be economical with reaching destinations. No? Logarithms, they shorten a path. So its opposite would be to prolong it. It would be to prolong it. It would be a kind of an exuberance. And there is indeed one function in mathematics that cannot be better characterized than this, and it's the exponential function. No? So we have the logarithmic function, which brings everything to a rational base. But then we have the exponential function, which raises everything to its powers. No? So whatever it is, if you subject it to the exponential function, you raise it to its power, so you bring it to its exponentiality, as the inverse to what you do when you bring it to the common denominator that is now very versatile, let's say, the digital. And this is now a play which actually does feel quite oceanic, quite adventurous, and quite Dionysian, without having left Ariadne at shore, no? Unlike Theseus, the sober person. So the main point is to keep this distinction. No? There is something in French. In German, it's more difficult with the terms. In French, there is this distinction between le savoir and la connaissance. And la connaissance is something which is as intellectual, but it's also embodied. It's also, if you want, affective. No? So the connaissance is something that we know also intuitively, but we have an awareness of it too. No? And le savoir has more to do with things that ontology can clarify, if there were one and not 1,000, if epistemological moralities could clarify, and so on. This contains the savoir. But the connaissance is another story. The connaissance is visceral. It's with the guts. But it's abstract, it's lofty, it's thought, it's mathematical, even at the same time. So the digital, we hardly attend to it with regard to this. No, what does the digital do? Not just with the management and the management of the savoir, but with regard to the connaissance, our capacities to become vers la connaissance. No, it's even there are clearly erotic implications in the French language game, and I think it's important because it's a way, and this is a bit where I want to lead it. I realize I'm already speaking for almost the time that I'm supposed to speak. Huh? How much more? Okay, good. Because what then this is heading for is, in a way, to think about this kind of erotics that is there in this viscerality, this bodiliness that is there in knowledge and in understanding, in learning, and so on. Much, I would say it positive. No, I say it negatively first. Much less focused on the act, much less focused on concept and conception, and the reproduction and everything in its symbolical domain that comes with it, and much more with the domain of the domestic, actually. No, so to enter a convivial relation, so to subject to a marriage, and to not reduce the marriage to an act, to the conception, to the prolonging of the bonds, but to make it work as a place to live in. Yeah, so it's a kind of an economic space, but it's an economic space where the economical would not be separated against the political. No, that's how we usually think. The economical is towards the inside, it's the oikos, and the political is oriented towards the outside, to the world. It's like a miniature of the crossing of these two. Think of the lapidary who wants to make the hard appear soft and the soft appear hard. So it's this kind of building, if you want. It's this kind of, and I would call this now architectonics instead of just architecture, no, as a metaphor for the building that will be solid and on standing on firm foundations and so on. So the architectonics, the kind of knowing that is a connaissance of how to create places that can host such conviviality. So I keep with connaissance for all of these implications. And maybe, yeah, so to clarify this, it's important because I have it in my title. No? The eschaton, it's in this, eschaton and eschatology are not the same thing. So the logis always comes from logos. So how do we speak about it? What is its doctrine? How should we speak about it? But what the term means, the Greek one, is something like, so it literally means the last things that remain, so that will be left, and it's related to the apocalypse, which is the Offenbarung, which is the revelation. So it's this kind of shore or of Janus-based turning period or something like that. And why it has been so important and also so much standing in relation to the arts is that it's hard to imagine a way to think a kind of growth that would not be one, an athletic growth, where we grow more strength and more muscles, but one where we grow this kind of delicacy that comes with connaissance, even if the bodies get clumsy at the same time. So a kind of a growth that has something to do with an intensity, with an interiorization, not with something that unfolds to the outside extensionally, but that really is a kind of an infolding, an involution, a kind of an inner landscaping, if you want, or something like this. So all ideas that have been mainly addressed to in kind of spiritual teachings, but also in education very generally before the Enlightenment. What you see here, for example, is a rather arbitrary depiction of a grammar book. And you see, in order to understand grammar, you need at least these four friends here. You need fortitude, so you need luck. Then you need prudence. You need a kind of a cautious, a considerateness, a moderateness. You need lust. You must desire. You cannot engage. You cannot hope to understand anything about grammar if you don't desire to do so. And you need temperance, no? So one needs to have an active relation to one's feelings, dislike or attraction or a seduction or whatever it is, to kind of cultivate a temperate way of relating to it. This was an ordinary way of teaching grammar. So you see that this, what sounds so suspiciously non-secular today, was totally normal for a very, very long time. And it's hard to imagine how not to lose these dimensions to whatever kind of new forms of institutionalizations if we don't find ways to call them anymore, no? To call them on stage, to address them, to speak with them and in relation to it. And it's again Michel Serres who has written a book that makes a strong proposal. I have the terms here, metaphysics and metanomics. He wrote his very last book, which was on religion in German. It has been, interestingly, almost nothing has been translated, but this one almost instantly. Das Verbindende. In French, it is relire le relier. Or I'm never, there's a language game. I'm never quite sure if I get it right. In it, what he writes is that with regard to metaphysics, he says the main problem is that just like people came up with the idea that, okay, we can study nature, the study of nature, let's call it physics. This study of nature, it follows a certain objectivity with its metrics, with its labeling, with its orders, and so on. But it's important that we have something that cannot be positively demonstrated in the same way, but that goes into our imagination of how to make things demonstrable. This is metaphysics in his understanding. And he says it has been such actually quite incomprehensible why the same gesture, we haven't done it for the term not physics, but law, nomos. No? So the things that we say they are settling the primary forms of order, let's say. And the laws about which, of course, everybody always fights, because there's not one commensurate system of laws, not even in physics with regard to the natural laws. So he says we should, rather than trying to get rid of metaphysics, we need to couple it with a pendant which is as powerful and as lofty as metaphysics is with regard to physics. And this he calls metanomics with regard to the nomos. And what you get from this relation now is not some kind of function or some kind of equation, but what you get is genuinely architectonic four-term proportioning systems, no? So you have metaphysics is to physics, like metanomics is to nomos. It's two relations of likeness that are linked not by identity, but by analogy. And the analogy is this vertical element that comes in. This is the architectonic. So one can always think an analogy by modeling in 1,000 ways. Maybe not 1,000, but many ways. There is never one necessary way to achieve this modeling. And this kind of analogical reasoning now, this is what Ariadne, as the wife of Dionysus, no, we can imagine, perhaps, can help to achieve. For a kind of a domain of conviviality, a domain of domesticity that doesn't try to fight the digital or to entirely militarize whatever practice or activity it is through the means of the digital, but that just continues to live as well as possible with the digital as part of how we think. No? So it's not this obsession with the truth statues. And then maybe to close, why then bring this to the level of world? There is a way to attend. I said in the beginning with this continent, it's for me, it's a geographical image, not a I wouldn't want to immediately call it a geopolitical image. Of course, I'm aware it acts like that, no? But I don't think one needs to address it straightforwardly like this. And that's if it, again, take into account this domain of the quasi beyond and quasi below, no? So this meteora. One of the first comprehensive treatises on it was written by Aristotle. Almost every systematic thinker until Descartes wrote his own book on the meteorology, and always as a book about the world as a whole, the whole world, out of a natural philosophy perspective. So not of a didactic interest. No, encyclopedias, they would more have the person who will be educated by what they write in mind, but the people who write meteorologies, they would have the nature as a science in mind, not primarily a pedagogical or a didactic recipient, but the thing as the thing, so the world as the world. Geography itself, and this is a book which was recently published by an Italian geographer, Franco Farinelli, it takes as its title, interestingly, Blinding Polyphemus. No, Polyphemus was this one eye, so he could see everything. He didn't have the binocular. There was no problem with the optics. It was a kind of would see everything always, instantly. No? And he says, for there to be geography, Polyphemus needs to be blinded. So we cannot be in the full presence of the daylight always, everywhere. We need to have blindness and sight. We need to have day and night in order to work on the coded level, so on the intermediate level, how we should make a picture of the whole thing, because a picture will not be an actively sighting organ, no? Like this mystical eye that Polyphemus has. So then, if we follow this, it is quite evident that there is never one model of the world, but geography becomes the activity of modeling the world. And he begins his book with these two passages, no? So he says, the two names of the earth. Geography is the description of the earth. This has been repeated for centuries, but this is not true, because in the meantime, the most important thing has been forgotten, that it is exactly through this description that the world is reduced to the earth to its surface, and this surface to a table. This kind of reduction, here you can see code making order and disappearing in the order that it makes. No? So there is a reduction at work, which is only a reduction if we let go of the role that code plays in this kind of ordering. And he says, if we attend to it, then there is an equally old history to think about it. And it's a history which comes very close to Leibniz's monadology, where everything is a kind of a universal mirror. So what he writes is in the Spanish language, where one of the first geography books happens to have been written, the title is The World's Resemblance. And he says, the title depends on the fact that the work is conceived as a kind of mirror of the world, and the mirror reflects only what the philosophers define as the phenomenal aspect of things, or what one immediately sees. It should be noted in this regard that the first of the two Greek terms which the phrase geography is composed of means Gaia in Latin, and thus the land which glimmers and shines in the light. The other name, the first, with which the Greeks indicated the earth, was chthon. I have no clue how to pronounce it properly, which in Italian survives in the adjective chtonico. So chthonic, which means subterranean, cavernous, a name which resounds, asks to be heard. Okay, I stopped the sentence there. No? So geography itself already had, in this legacy that this whole book speaks about, this kind of what we today claim new materialist legacy, no? Where matter and form somehow are intertwined. Neither do we have pure form, nor is there such a thing as pure matter, but things are relationally constituted, and as a relational constitution, they're situational, but at the same time, there is something universal of it. All of these ideas, which kind of come back to us today in all of these new forms of scholarship, they are in many ways the oldest ideas that people have been thinking with. And I guess this was a bit my to come to a point now, this was a bit my hope with gathering these different essays under the title, The Digital Continent. So can we not confabulate about the digital, of the digital, if it is so preoccupying the way that we make sense of things, in ways that are more, I called it in my book, of a plant-like kind of intelligence. Not the plants, so plants, they don't move as much as animals do, but they photosynthesize. No? So can we not, and there have, again, people been thinking about this for a long time, there is something metabolic of intellection. So when we let go of the centrality of us being individual subjects, which for some reason can bring some truth out of our innermost interiority that is just mine and nobody else's, if we can make a little bit of a step back from such an understanding of creativity to one that is more inventive, that is also cunning, that is also mechanic, that is also collective, and that is to a certain extent impersonal, so not depending. So it's beautiful if the thing works on its own and doesn't need me to be there at the same time. So if we can step a little bit back from this preoccupation, then how to think of the digital? What can it do for us? How to in a way redirect this thinking more like plants would, no? And plants, and I take this. I mean, it's in a way many of these things are trivias, no? When we think of them, it's just that they're so normal they don't make us wonder. But the plants literally, they are cosmogonic in the literal sense of the word. Plants always create the atmosphere in which they will prosper, and not just them. Also the animals, also the way that the landscapes. So there is this beautiful book by Gottschalk that you probably know, no? Die Wurzeln der Welt in German. It's super fascinating to think. It's like you apply the optics of an anthropocentric or even an animal-centric kind of intellection, and you just shift these optics, and you say, with this, I now want to code what I observe when I study what plants do. That's all he does. No, there's no eschatological message. Even so, if one wants, in a way, there is, no? But it's not a moral message that he comes up with. It's just making use of a certain optics, translating it to study something else, and being very literal and very descriptive, and letting things speak in the way that they unfold. And then keeping a critical distance and observing what has happened. So this, in a way, is what I wanted to propose with this book, to kind of start shifting such optics, to get a kind of an agility. So if it appears cryptic, if one feels this is not written for me, I don't understand immediately. No, if one feels offended by that, it's because it's meant to be a kind of an exercise book. But it's not, it's an exercise in a kind of a Könnerschaft. It's not an exercise in making you skilled to perform a certain task better. It's the beauty of thinking. So I'm doing theory since I can remember. I'm lucky enough to be able to make my living from that. I don't want to sacrifice it. More people should have the beauty of this. And I do believe that it is helping to consolidate and to contract things, even or especially perhaps when it does not directly head at solving one problem or another. So this is how I would today characterize the book I was invited to come. It's here, you can have a look, and I thank you very much.